So when I say I'm glad to be in a room full of smiling faces, I mean my cheeks hurt from smiling so hard. Really, you guys are amazing. What I've realized this past year, oh my gosh, this year has been a year of maturing, a year of learning, a year of trying to figure out how to navigate all of this crazy stuff. But the thing I've learned the hardest way, I guess, is the quickest way to make God laugh in your face is to make a plan for yourself. I graduated from the University of Kentucky last year, where I got my degree in human health sciences and health law. I had every intention on being in dental school this year. Actually, what I always wanted to do was endodontics, which is root canals. And I'm clearly not doing that. But really, Mary Elizabeth is right. I could have just done that, rode off into the sunset with my 6'4" British husband, who now has a slight southern twang to his British accent. It's really cute. But I'm not. I feel totally unequipped for the position that I'm in. I felt this for the past year, even when Alvin was saying, Bradley, did you raise your hand? My face turned the color of a tomato. Just to highlight how this is not something I ever could have possibly planned for myself. But I graduated from the University of Kentucky as a 12-time NCAA All-American, a 5-time SEC champion. I'm actually the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, which means I have really big shoulders under these long, flowy sleeves I like to wear, making me one of the fastest Americans of all time. Olympic trials, all of the things. But all of that to say that competing at that level is a lifelong journey. It's impossible to put into words the amount of time and sacrifices and dedication that it takes to get to that point. But that's something we were willing to do. By the time you get to middle school, high school, you're practicing before school, you then go to school, you come back from school, you go straight to practice again. You come home, you eat your dinner, you do your homework, you go to bed, and you wake up and you do it the next day. At the collegiate level, we were practicing 6 hours every day in the water, 3 hours before 8 a.m. So you'd swim, again, you'd go to class, you'd come back, you'd swim from 1:30 to 4:30. And this was my life for 18 years. I dedicated 18 years to my sport. Not just your sport-specific training, but your weights, your diet, your sleep, your physical rehabilitation, not to mention the social sacrifices. You don't get to have sleepovers with your friends. You don't get to go to prom. You don't get to go on vacations because, God forbid, you take one day off of your sport. At the collegiate level, you didn't get to come home for Christmas. You don't get to come home for Thanksgiving. You don't get to come home for summer. We got 1 week off in August each year, and that's it. Fast forward to, I guess, the recruiting process. I was very fortunate to have been one of the top recruits in the nation, and to be totally frank, I could have gone anywhere I wanted in the country. I always thought I was going to be a Florida Gator. I'm biased. I think the SEC is the best conference, but that's looking hopeful for a lot of people in this room who are UT fans come a couple years. But I always thought I was going to be a Florida Gator, and I took my trip there, and it just wasn't what I worked up in my head. My boyfriend at the time, he was a big Kentucky fan, and the coaches, they were hounding me, come on a visit here. We would love to have you. And so I thought I'd go on a visit there, and I can take my boyfriend to a basketball game, a free basketball game. This was when Kentucky wasn't losing to the St. Norrisburg Peacocks or whatever. So I was like, this will be a really cool girlfriend thing to do. So I went there kind of on a whim, not thinking anything of it, but to be totally honest, I fell in love. I fell in love with the university, the coaches, the team, the resources outside of just the athletic opportunities. And I committed there. Freshman year, I had a good freshman year, but it was a lot of adjusting. Sophomore year, we come back, and I had finally developed this sense of consistency. And I was performing really well. I was having this breakout season. But in March of 2020, which is when our NCAA championships were supposed to take place, COVID hit. About 3 days before we were supposed to leave, we all got sent home. And when our coaches told us we were being sent home, I was secretly under my breath like, oh my gosh, yes, this is going to be so fun, we get time off. But about 48 hours into that time off, I realized we're going to eventually have to come back, and that was a scary thought, and I didn't know what to do. Pools were closed, gyms were closed. But I'm very fortunate I'm from Tennessee, where there's lots of lakes. what school, which university you're at, you know of each other. So the girl who was in second, I was very familiar with. But the person who was ranked first, I'd never heard of before. And this was odd for a couple reasons. One of which being this person, and I'll say this girl because at the time I thought this was a girl. You'll notice my language changed when I realized. This girl was ranked first in the country in everything from the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, and all of the freestyle events in between to the mile, which is of course long distance. And so if you think about your Olympic runners, your best 200-meter runner is not your best marathon runner. But that's what we were seeing in this person. They're from University of Pennsylvania, which is not historically a school that produces fast swimmers. They were a senior. Lots of red flags. Again, unbeknownst to me, this was a male. I thought that was so out of reach. I thought that would never happen. A few days after these nation-leading times were posted, an article came out with a very brief sentence. I'm talking like a blip, as if we were supposed to read right over it. Leah Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before switching to the women's team, and then continued on. And my coach sent me the link to the article, because of course he knew my goals, and he said, "You need to read this." So I read it, and I read it again, and I of course was shocked. But truthfully, I felt this sense of relief, because I was able to look up who Will Thomas was. I was curious, was this a lateral movement? Was this someone who went from ranking first to now continuing to rank first? Which is of course not what we saw. This was a mediocre man at best. He ranked 462nd in the nation prior to switching to the women's teams. And that's why I say I felt a sense of relief, because I thought the NCAA would see it exactly how I saw it, exactly how anyone with a brain would see it. Nothing opinionated, nothing hateful, the facts on the paper in front of us. That's not how the NCAA saw it. They saw absolutely nothing wrong with having Leah Thomas compete against the women, and they announced that about 3 weeks before our national championships. I got to personally witness and feel the effect that this infringement had on myself and the other girls at that meet. It's impossible to speak for every single person there, but I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw from the 9th and 17th place finishers who missed out on being named an All-American by 1 place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around and there's a 6'4" male fully intact with an exposing male genitalia watching other girls undress. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the talks and grumbles and whispers of anger and frustration from these girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get to that point. That first day of competition was the 500 freestyle. This is not an event that I do, it's way too long for me. So I sat on the side of the pool and watched. That morning, at this level, you have to swim prelims, and then you have to qualify for finals, and you'll come back and you'll race it again at night if you make top 16. And so that morning, I'm watching, I'm standing on the side of the pool, and this girl, there was about 8 heats of the 500. A girl, her name is Reka, she's from Virginia Tech. She was in 5th year, she's actually from Hungary. We got an extra year of eligibility because of COVID if we wanted it, and why anyone would take it, I don't know. But Reka did. And so she had just swam in one of the earlier heats of the 500. And she's standing beside me, watching these later heats to see if she would qualify top 16. And I didn't know her that well. I knew of her, but I didn't know her well. And so we're standing beside each other, and we're watching this last heat where Leah Thomas is racing. And of course, Leah Thomas is beating everyone by body lengths. The last heat finishes, and Reka looks up at the board, and she saw she got 17th. And she looks at me, she grabs my hand, and she looks at me with tears flowing down her face and says, "I just got beat by someone who didn't even have to try." And that's when my feelings shifted, because up until this point, I kind of just felt confused. I felt almost a sense of intriguement. I, of course, knew it was wrong, but it was kind of like, let's see what's going to happen. But when I saw how it affected Reka, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I felt heartbroken. And of course, that night, Leah comes back and again beats everyone in the country, every girl in the entire country by body lengths. And I want to mention, a body length in swimming is a lot. This is a sport that's measured down to the 100th of a second. So to have one person beating every other person in the country by multiple seconds, that's a rarity. 200 freestyle, which is the event that Thomas and I raced in. We raced, we qualified for finals, we raced again, and ultimately it ended up in a tie. We went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. And I know some of you might have heard this story before, but after time, we go behind the awards podium where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself, Thomas towering over me, and he says, "Great job, you guys tied. We don't really account for ties, so Leah gets the trophy." And so I, of course, was just taken aback by this. And I asked him, "Okay, I understand we tied, and I understand there's one trophy, but why are you adamant on giving this trophy to Thomas?" And no one had questioned anything they'd done thus far, so he wasn't prepared to answer this. So he stumbled on his words, and he kind of, "Well, we're just doing this in chronological order." To which I further pressed, "Okay, G comes before T, so what now?" And he said, "Well, to be honest, Leah has to have the trophy for photos. You can pose with this one, but you'll have to give it back. You go home empty-handed and Leah takes the trophy." And that is when I realized I had enough. I knew up until this point, as I mentioned, I knew the unfair competition was wrong. I knew the locker room was wrong. But when they reduced everything that we'd worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings of a male, that was when it was done for me. And up until this point, I was waiting for someone else to speak up, waiting for a coach, waiting for someone within the NCAA, someone with political power, a parent, some other swimmer, anyone else. But then it hit me that if we as female athletes weren't willing to stick up for ourselves, how could we expect someone else to stick up for us? And that's really what I did. But there's one more piece of this meet that I want to mention that I think the media has done a really terrible job of covering, and I think it highlights so perfectly how the women's category is at jeopardy. Because at this same meet where we had Leah Thomas, who is of course male to female, transitioning to female, we had another trans swimmer who was a female transitioning to a male. Fully identified as a male, used he, him pronouns, had a double mastectomy, so I'm only in a Speedo, which, to be totally explicit here, and I'm going to say it because we had to look at it, there was a woman swimming in a Speedo and in the finals of the 100 freestyle next to a man in a woman's suit with a bulge in his suit, to be totally frank. It felt as if we were living in the Twilight Zone. But I say this because if we were basing this off gender identity, like the NCAA wanted to claim, then why did we have someone identifying as a male competing with the women? And I can answer this question. It's because Izzy, now identifying as Isaac, would have never been able to compete with the men, and is an All-American female. Now, Izzy or Isaac is competing with the men, and the only person Isaac has beaten all year is a male swimmer with one arm. And again, this is a female swimmer who was ranked top 5, top 6 in the country in the 100 freestyle. Just putting that out there. I started speaking up. The media attention that was at that meet, I think we can all agree swimming is not a sport that garners media attention. But there were so many reporters at that meet who were desperately trying to get a quote from anyone who would talk to them, and no one would. So my inbox on Instagram and Twitter and different things was full of reporters. And so I called my athletic director. His name's Mitch Barnhart. He's a phenomenal guy, and I told him, this is what happened. This is how we feel. How do you feel if I take a public stance? And he responded back with, "Riley, I love you. I would support whatever stance you took. Stay true to your heart, speak your convictions, and don't worry about painting the university in a bad light." And I kind of just said thanks and hung up because I thought that's how any athletic director would talk to their student athlete, which I now realize, oh my gosh, that is so wrong. But I agreed to do an interview with the Daily Wire, which blew up. That very quickly turned into Fox and CPAC and all kinds of different things that I was not prepared for. And I think it blew up for a couple reasons. One, people were able to see the severity of what we were dealing with in terms of the locker room. I think that's important to a lot of parents. Two, I think sports is something that just resonates with everyone. It's not boring like the economy or the environment. Everyone likes to hear about sports. But my parents, well, I guess I very to spread your hate. And this was hard for me to hear. I wasn't spreading hate. I was offering a different perspective, a perspective of someone who dealt with this, who was impacted by this. Yet they didn't want to hear it. But I did begin to feel like I was kind of almost complaining in a sense. My parents, I come from a very athletic family. My dad, he played in the NFL. All my uncles, my brothers played college football. My mom, she played softball. So I'm very fortunate they understand sports. That being said, they were very tough on me. And so, which I'm very blessed for. My dad, he's always told me, it's either put up or shut up, Riley. You can complain all you want, but unless you're willing to do something about it, stop complaining, stop whining. And I began to feel like I was whining. So I was ready to get involved in making changes. What could I do to make changes? And that's when I started traveling state to state. At the beginning of this, totally out of my own pocket. I was paying to go to these places. I was paying to fly and get in front of legislature and share my testimony, doing everything I could to enact change. And I can proudly say there are 22 states now that have passed some sort of fairness in women's sports bill. 15 of which protecting the collegiate level, and Texas will soon make 16. Really great stuff. I think they have one more committee to go through until it's heard on the floor, which is phenomenal. And Texas Values has been there for me this entire time. This is not something they didn't just hop on this, helping me these past few months. They've been there this past year, getting me in front of Texas legislature. And I want to mention Texas is crucial. I think you guys know this. Other states look to Texas constantly. Texas is a leader. And that's why I think this has to be done. It's really paramount. And so I couldn't be more grateful for Texas Values, for Representative Valerie Swanson and Senator Mays Middleton, who have just done phenomenal work in getting this in front of the House and in front of the Senate. But at the federal level, what's happening? Obviously, Title IX, it's a federal civil rights law that is supposed to stop discrimination on the basis of sex among college campuses. We have an administration in the White House right now who is actively working to rewrite Title IX. It would now not stop discrimination on the basis of sex, it would stop discrimination on the basis of gender identity. So what this means, men could live in dorm rooms with women, men could join sororities, men would have full access to all bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces on campus. Men could take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. In this new rewrite, it's actually sexual harassment if you misgender a trans-identifying individual. It's not sexual harassment for them to be parading around in your locker room with the opposite genitalia. And that's something I want to touch on a little more, is the locker room. Again, this is being explicit because it's what we have to go through, and I think people need to hear it. We were not forewarned we would be sharing a locker room. We had no idea. Of course, we knew about the competition, but I'll kind of set the scene. A swimming locker room is not a place of modesty. These suits you put on, it takes about 15 minutes to really tuck and pack yourself into these suits. They're skin tight, 15 minutes of which you're fully exposed. But it's also this place of buzzing and chatter, especially at our national championships, because this is the one meet a year where everyone in the country, every school gets to get together. So you get to see your friends from all over. There's so much talking and laughing, and it's a buzzing environment. But I can't even tell you the silence, the dead silence, when a male walks into that space. Again, being totally blind prestigious honor for female athletes. And I took a lot of pride in this because while I dedicated myself athletically, I was the SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year. I was the SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. I really tried to be a well-rounded individual, which is something I'm still passionate about. I'm the Special Olympics swim team head coach for Tennessee. So these things are things I genuinely care about. We have practice tomorrow morning. But I was so honored when I got this because we had a national championship volleyball team, a national championship rifle team, we had the #1 WNBA draft pick at Kentucky, we have Abby Steiner who's breaking world records in track and field, and they nominated me. A few weeks after I got my nomination, they released a full list of the nominees. And of course, NCAA Woman of the Year was not exclusive to women, because Leah Thomas was nominated for Woman of the Year. And that's why I say this is being celebrated. And that's when I realized that it's silly for me. Up until this point, I tried to give the NCAA grace. Oh my gosh, how silly was I to do that? On top of all of this, I want to mention the silencing aspect. Why it feels as if I've been this lone voice and lone face on talking about this issue. These girls, I mentioned my story with my athletic director, and I mentioned how that is an anomaly. Leah Thomas's teammates, I've talked to them at great lengths, and they filled me in on what they go through, what they went through on a daily basis, all year. They were forced to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. When they were concerned about the locker room, they sent an email to their administration. I think there were 16 girls and their parents on this email thread, and I swear I have a screenshot of their response. The administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia in your locker rooms, here are some counseling resources that you should seek. They were told, you're not allowed to take a stance because your school has already taken your stance for you. They were told you will never get a job, you will lose all your friends, you'll never get into grad school, you'll lose your scholarship and playing time if you speak out. They were told, if you happen to speak out, and any harm whatsoever comes towards Leah's way, whether that be emotional, physical, mental harm, then you are solely responsible. And could you live with yourself being solely responsible? And so these girls, they were emotionally blackmailed every day. They were tormented, they were intimidated, they were gaslit, honestly. And that is a lot more common than what I faced. That's what the silencing looks like for the athletes, but the coaches, the administrators. I got and I've gotten lots of coaches message me, but I got a screenshot of what the NCAA said to the Georgia Tech host rep. Our national championships were at Georgia Tech. They sent an email saying, if you speak out in opposition now stepped down. Publicly, after Leah Thomas swam, he released a statement saying that he unequivocally stood in his decision to allow Leah to swim because it was based in evolving science. Privately, he comes up and says, keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting. And I say this to show the lack of a backbone, the cowardice, the lack of authenticity, the lack of leadership that the people in powerful positions to make changes have. And we're seeing this at the Texas Capitol in regards to this gender modification stuff, in regards to a lot of issues. They know what's right. They know what's moral, yet they're not willing to say it. A year after all of this, I've taken a step back and I've realized this is a lot bigger than just women's sports. I don't like to consider myself someone who's naive, but I was definitely naive. Look at what's happening in regards to the changing of the language we use. There's lists now with words that are offensive, mother being one of them. Sorry, moms in here, you're now birth givers. Breastfeeding, no, you're a chest feeder. There's dictionaries that are changing the definition of woman. Look at what's happening in prisons. Men who are convicted of awful, heinous things, such as child pornography, kidnapping, rape, they now realize all you have to do to be a woman is say, I am a woman. And you typically get lesser charges. You get to get into women's prisons, which sounds great to a rapist. And they're impregnating women. It's happened in Kansas, New Jersey, Ohio, and California. In recent weeks, there was over 1,300 men applied to be women, which is wild. But really all of this, and I know Jonathan touched on this, it really is spiritual warfare. I've always been someone who's spiritual. My family, I grew up in Church of Christ. So every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, we were in church, and I was the youngest one by at least 60 years, which is a bit of a drag when you're 12 years old. losing out on opportunities. So my question is, how many women have to get hurt? How many women have to go through what I did and so many others did and continue to do before change is made, before people are willing to stick out for us? Parents in the room, I think it's crucial to defend your daughters and teach your sons masculinity. I think that's something we've gone so far from. We need strong men. Every girl likes a strong man. I think these Texas ladies know too. But I really do appreciate everyone being here. When I said my cheeks hurt, they really did. They're kind of sore from just smiling so hard. And that's such a blessing. It really is. And so, again, thank you guys.
Don't leave yet, Riley. Come on, Riley. So, we're going to try to do this again because we tried to do it a month ago and we didn't do it exactly right. You heard Riley didn't get the trophy at the event. So, we decided to make our own NCAA trophy. Congratulations, you are the true champion. Yeah, we did a good job. Thank you, Riley. Okay, I made a mistake on the screen. If you'll show our sponsors, wonderful sponsors for this event: Steve Smith, Susan and Ben Taylor, John and Cheryl Bean, our title sponsors, Vince and Mona Puente, so many great people, Senator Phil King, Senator Tim Parker, Senator Lois Corcoran, Senator Mays Middleton, so many. Speaking of